Welcome to the Renegade Nutrition Podcast, where we discuss all things nutrition.
I'm Eleni Welch, nutritionist.
And I'm Kay Boyer, health enthusiast. Hello, Renegades.
What's up, Renegade?
Welcome back to the Renegade Nutrition Podcast. I am the health enthusiast, Kay Boyer.
And I am Eleni Welch, nutritionist.
And we are here today to talk about a topic that is near and dear to my heart, but breaking my heart a little bit, Eleni. Sugar. All right, today we're going to learn all about it. Eleni is bringing tons of information for us to learn more about this delectable food. Can I have sugar for every meal, Eleni? Is what I need to start out saying.
I will just shortcut for anybody who's
Yes.
like one of those like attention deficit. No.
Mm.
No,
All right.
no sugar.
All right.
No sugar.
We'll have to watch our sugar here, and we need to talk about the why and the what and what that means and what we can do in our life. If I can't have sugar,
Yeah.
you know, what is there left to live for? And that's what you're going to find out in this podcast. And I speak for all Americans here as addicts. Truly, as addicts, what are we to do, Eleni?
You're so good, Kay.
Yes.
That's awesome. Okay, well, this is really exciting to me. This is episode 2
Yep.
of the Renegade Nutrition Podcast. So if you joined us for our previous episode, Kay and I introduced ourselves, told a little bit of our stories and how we got to where we are today, and then why we're doing this podcast. And I really was reflecting on that as I was preparing for this podcast of how exciting it is for me to be able to share this information, not just about today's topic, but about every topic, because I talked a little bit in our last podcast about the fact that Iowa laws prevent me from being able to practice as a nutritionist under my own license. I have to work for either a medical doctor, a chiropractor, or some other health professional.
Bureaucracy.
Bullshit.
Bullshit. The other B word is bullshit. Yes.
And that's very frustrating for me, having spent 3.5 years immersed in my education, getting a master's degree in nutrition, having passed my boards in 2018,
Yep.
to not be able to practice my profession here in Iowa.
Yep. Being amply educated. Yes.
Exactly.
Yep.
And so this is really fun because this is one of the ways in which I can share
Yes.
information with people and help a lot of people on a larger scale
Yep.
than I would
In
ever
a
be able to.
Practical way. Teaching us the way and how important it is. Yes. And in a culture where there's so many other messages on nutrition, talk to us about what you have learned in the schooling, in the studies. What do the tests say? What is the science of it? Give us the good stuff.
Yeah.
The good stuff.
The good stuff.
Yep.
Yeah, so I know when we were preparing for starting this podcast in general, then I asked you, Kay, like what would the first episode, what should that actually be about? And you said, well, what's the one thing?
Yes.
Like what's
Yes.
one thing everybody could change today?
Yep.
The first step.
Yep. In nutrition to make their life better.
Yeah. If
Yep.
you could only do one thing,
Yep.
what would it be?
Yep.
And so right away I was like, oh, okay, well, remove sugar.
Nah. And I'm like, wrong answer, Eleni. We're gonna need something else.
I wanted you to say add alcohol.
Just add gin and tonic to every meal. Take away sugar. Don't touch my sugar. Like,
And I
yes.
think too, like, it'd be interesting. I know when you and I first met, and
Yep.
you were my like nutrition wellness coaching patient.
Yes. Yep.
Then we were talking about your diet, and you were doing all of these things right.
Yes.
I mean, you already were eating really healthy, and you
Yep.
were like,
I'm well rounded.
yeah, you're
Yep.
like, I don't have gluten. I like have tested all my food sensitivities, so
Yep.
I avoid all the things I'm sensitive to, which includes gluten, and I don't have
Dairy
and I don't
even
do
almond. Okay, go ahead. Yeah, I
Yeah.
know all those things.
And you were like, I only eat acorns if they've been soaked in unicorn tears.
Yes,
by the
yes,
light
yes.
of the full moon.
yes. with a chakra over it. Yes, yes. I do all the right things.
All the right things. And then you were telling me that you still felt tired,
Yep.
like fatigued.
Around 3:00 in the afternoon.
Yeah. And
Yep.
then had problems with your skin and you
Yep.
felt generally inflamed and you were like,
Yep.
I just know I'm not there.
Yeah.
And then we kind of started talking about
Yep.
things and we realized you're like, okay, well, I do have a problem with sugar.
Yeah, but don't touch my problem with sugar, Eleni. Don't touch
It's just, I just have some every day.
Yeah. So I used to, and this is how bad of an ad. I'm like a recovering addict here, so it's still triggering for me. I always, Eleni, had in my freezer frozen brownie batter and frozen cookie dough. But like not like, now I do that in like a quacky way. Like I have, in an alternative way, I add, like a little bit of honey or a little bit of maple syrup. And I know even to limit that. But now I still have that in my freezer. But I used to do like hardcore, like the brownie batter where you get like corn syrup in it and a little bit of vegetable oil. You don't know where it came from and it's been in your cupboard for a couple years and it's real grimy. I mean, like from the box on the shelf, you know what I mean? And I loved it. But thank you, Eleni. I have cut out of my freezer. Yeah. I have. And I feel way better.
Way better.
Yes.
And that was really the only thing.
Yeah.
That, like, of everything you were doing
Yep.
right, that was the only thing that was really hurting.
Yep. That really tipped the scale to the other side.
And now
I agree.
Now I think you've shared with me in sessions since then of
Yep.
like, I have the energy, I don't crave sugar like I did, I feel way better, my skin's way better.
Seriously.
Am I missing anything?
No, okay, seriously. This is absolutely true. And I also don't crave it anymore. So I used to work as a carpenter with my dad for a while, like super hard labor, like carrying shingles on the roof. So we always
cool.
like, I'm like legit, I've had a very odd life, but that was a portion of my life. And to be on that job is, I mean, like literally laborious. So we would always have like donut breaks and candy bar breaks and pop breaks. Like that was part of that culture because you have to have the energy to move on, right? And we just needed something fast. So I remember now like being like, oh, I'm going to go work outside for today. Like I'm going to go do something. I need a candy bar because I'm going to go do manual labor. Now I have to like re-trigger like, no, Kay, that's going to make you fatigued in the long run. So now I'm able to sustain my energy in a different way where I don't get the slumps. And at 3:00 in the afternoon, I don't feel that fatigue that I used to. Awesome. Which is unreal. And now I don't crave it anymore is the other cool thing. Because I'm also a person, you can't really tell me what to do. So it was like, you can't have sugar. And I'm like, don't say that. Like, don't you say that.
Bitch.
Bitch, take it away.
You don't know my life.
You don't know me. You don't know my sugar life. So to be able to now be like, I don't even crave it. And I'm doing a no sugar challenge in January with anyone who wants to join, if you get this in time. A 30 days no sugar and 30 days you sweat each day. And my mother-in-law, we have Christmas that she goes, I'll watch her. I'll make sure she doesn't eat a cookie at Christmas. And I thought, I don't think she's been paying attention to our last 4 family get-togethers over the last 2 years. Like, I no longer eat the sweets and I do not miss them. And that's a really cool part. It's not even a temptation. I'm just like, that'll make me feel bad. I'm going to go eat something else. So
that is so cool.
Anyway,
that's a cool testimony.
Yes, it is. We're there.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'll jump into it because I'm going to be honest. So when I first started preparing for this podcast, I was like, okay, so I already know from my education, from research papers I've read about the effects of sugar in the body and why it's important to eliminate it.
Yep.
But I feel like people, like, they don't want to just hear what you know. They want to know that it's from a verified source. So, like, okay,
yes.
My master's degree maybe doesn't mean that much to people.
Yes. Those hours are nothing.
So it was like, I'm going to look up other resources and find health professionals and share the information that they're sharing. And one source that I found ended up providing a lot of information for this podcast. And that book was The Case Against Sugar. I think, where did I put it? Oh, yeah.
Do we have it?
By Gary Taubes. Yeah. I was like, it's just right there.
I got you.
Just hold that up for people who want to see it. For our video watching people who aren't just audio only. What an obstacle course you have to move through here. There you go. You want to hold that up for our people?
Yes.
There we go. So The Case Against Sugar, super, super interesting book. I believe Gary is a journalist. And he has written a lot of information about the food industry.
Oh,
and
fascinating.
You can see how dog-eared that book is. And if you, like, open it, you'll see I have just highlighted the, like, crap out.
The yellow. The whole page. You can't highlight a whole page.
I know. I only did it a few times. So I went through and I highlighted the things and what was so I was only halfway through the book. Well, now I've pretty much read the whole book, but I haven't gone in depth on capturing even half the content I want to from the book, and it was already 17 typed pages.
Okay.
And
a lot of good info.
I was
love it.
I texted Kay and I'm like, okay, I can't do this all in one episode.
Okay.
So this is going to be our sugar mini series.
Yes. Yep.
So it's going to be several episodes.
Yep. Solidify why we need to slow down on the glycemic nuclear bomb.
Exactly.
That we call
the glucose mushroom that we're
yes,
atomizing into our bloodstream.
Yes. Yes.
So then I was thinking, well, how am I going to break this down? Because I think it's really important for people to understand all the aspects of sugar. So not only why it's harmful for our health, but why it's still so prevalent in society when we, especially over the last 2 years, seem so adamant about protecting people's health. Like, why is sugar still allowed when we make it really difficult to, we tax cigarettes,
yes.
And then, like, why aren't we taxing
fountain pop?
Exactly.
Or whatever.
And sugar products and corn syrup.
Yes.
And there's so much in the history of sugar.
I love it.
And the subsidization of sugar, that I was like, people need to understand this, because I think it's really important to know, why your doctor probably doesn't very often talk about sugar when he talks with you about various health issues.
Yep.
And why the government isn't doing anything to actively actually protect our health, which if we would simply cut out sugar, if the one thing. If that was the only thing we could ever do, if we could cut out sugar, it would revolutionize our health. And it is not because they don't know that.
Okay.
Like, it is not because our health officials and government officials don't know how terrible sugar is for us, that they don't know that it's causing heart disease and hypertension and diabetes and Alzheimer's and cancer. It is not because they don't know that. So I think
it has to do with money.
Always. Spoiler alert. It has to do with money.
About the money.
About the money.
Yep.
So I was thinking about how to break this up in order for it to be interesting and palatable and not overwhelming. And in the chiropractic world of leadership, I've been through leadership training, we talk about the heart, head, hands, and feet.
Okay.
And so the heart is always the why we do something.
Yes.
And the head is what we need to do. And then the hands and feet are how. Okay. So I was like, if I was going to break this down, I think we always say start with the heart, because if you don't understand why you're doing something, it's really hard to do it well or to care about why you're doing it. So like in
we don't even care.
Yeah. Motivation, it's to give people a picture of why they're doing something. And that's most important. So that's where we're going to start.
Let's do it. I'm so curious, and I have a feeling the Industrial Revolution is going to hop in here somewhere. So hit us with it. Let's start with
Okay, so the why is the heart. So why do we want to eliminate sugar? And I have all my notes here, so I apologize if you're watching this. You're going to see me looking down a lot, but I want to make sure there's so much valuable information. I don't want to miss any of it. So why? Well, why is because sugar consumption is significantly correlated with an increase in risk of obesity, diabetes, insulin resistance, metabolic syndrome, gout, hypertension, heart disease, stroke, dementia, Alzheimer's, mitochondrial disorders, hormonal disorders, psychological disorders, autoimmune conditions, and cancer.
Yes.
To name a few.
Yes. And this is fascinating. You read this and I'm like, yes, I resonate with that. If I were to tell that to my people in my hometown, they really would be like, no correlation. Yeah. Like there is no correlation, definitely not causation, but not even a correlation. Yeah. But it's like, no, it really is. So buckle up and we'll kind of listen how it does relate.
We'll get into it. So the westernization of diets has, which when I say westernization of diets, typically when a diet becomes westernized, then there's an increase in flour, refined products, bleach, sugar, fast food, that sort of thing, vegetable oils. That's what I'm talking about with the westernization of diets, is always associated with an increase in obesity, diabetes, hypertension, heart disease, gout, and cancer.
Okay.
Always.
Yep.
Always.
So key for me also, the one thing is the no sugar. Also watch those oils too. I know as well. So
Vegetable oils.
yep,
We're gonna
and
do a whole episode.
We'll
on
have
that.
an episode on oils. Yep.
So I'm gonna start with. I'm gonna go. What I decided to do is go through each of those conditions and talk about the compelling evidence as to how we know sugar plays a role in the development of those diseases, and then why it's still not really a recognized piece of those. And I'm gonna exonerate a few of the otherwise popularly blamed foods that often get the bullseye put on them for causing these diseases that really have far less to do with it.
Okay.
So I'm going to start with gout, which if you don't suffer from gout, you're probably like, why would I care about gout? But gout is a really interesting condition because it's so significantly associated with diabetes and hypertension and a lot of other disorders. And people who have gout are probably like, yes, tell me what to do, because it's extremely painful. So gout is a condition in which uric acid builds up in your blood and it forms crystals. That's as it falls out of solution, your blood becomes saturated with it, it forms crystals, and those crystals can build up in your joints and your soft tissues and your extremities. So there's oftentimes like toe pain is one of the things, and people who have really extreme gout, sometimes they can't even walk. That pain is so extreme. And that
pain is so real to them.
Yes.
And what can I do about that? Is what they're thinking. Yep.
And gout has for decades been mistakenly associated with red meat intake. And what's been recommended is purine-free diets. And so typically when somebody has gout, they have their doctors still today have them remove purine-rich foods like red meats, like fish, pork especially. I don't know the whole list of foods that are purine-free because I don't recommend that diet for anybody, because eliminating those foods that are so healthful can be extremely unhealthy. But that has been the popular opinion. And I'll go into why they thought that. Throw that page. I didn't double cite them just so I could get rid of them.
Next page.
So the interesting thing is how much red meat, fish consumption, pork consumption, all of that gets associated with gout. But they've done trials in vegetarian populations and they have just as much gout.
Fascinating.
So eliminating... And they've done studies in people with gout and had them switch to a vegetarian diet, and it's done very little to improve the gout. And interestingly is that meat actually can increase the excretion of uric acid from your kidneys, which decreases uric acid concentrations in your blood. So even though meat is high in purines, and they say the association of purines with the increased uric acid, actually eating meat can help your body excrete uric acid better. And gout has increased hand in hand with the whole spectrum of Western disorders. So insulin resistance, metabolic syndrome, hypertension, atherosclerosis, heart disease, diabetes, obesity, etc., for which we have demonstrated and we'll get into throughout this that sugar is the main culprit of causing those things. And then interestingly is that men who have suffered heart attacks are 4 times as likely to be hyperuricemic as healthy controls.
Fascinating.
So if you have gout, you are at a great increased risk of having heart disease, heart attacks. And the distribution of gout has paralleled increased availability of sugar for centuries. So as sugar consumption has increased, so has incidence of gout, which again, that's correlation, not causation.
But
they're not the same thing.
Right.
But it always is,
take note.
Worth investigating. Right. And then outside of that interesting correlation is the fact that now they have shown in studies that fructose in sugar increases serum levels of uric acid. So when fructose is metabolized by the liver, it increases breakdown, I'm going to get real sciencey here, of ATP.
Nerd alert, it's coming.
ATP, adenosine triphosphate, and adenosine is a purine. So there you go.
I've heard of ATP, so I just feel smarter just by, even though I know what that word.
You know that
I've heard it before.
Mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell.
Yes, I do know mitochondria. Mind your mitochondria, Terry Walls, #love her.
And fructose also increases levels of lactic acid, which reduces your kidney's ability to excrete uric acid.
Okay.
Which leads to a buildup of uric acid in the blood and subsequently gout attacks. And what's interesting is that gout is often hereditary. Okay. Which I don't even like saying hereditary, because I can't tell you how many times people have come to me and they're like, oh, well, it's hereditary. My mom had this, so I just have it. And I'm like, that's actually not how it works. When you have genetic components to any condition,
a predisposition,
you're predisposed to it, which means you have to work hard from the environmental and lifestyle side of things. But it doesn't mean you're just going to get it. It just means you are at higher risk of getting it. And
so you work harder to try to not get it. Yep.
But whenever people think that something's genetic or hereditary, it's almost like it accompanies them just giving up because they think there's nothing they can do. Don't do that.
Don't do that. Don't give up. That's what we're here for, to tell everyone. Do not give up. Keep trying in the right direction.
So the genetic component to gout is linked to a mutation in the genes that regulate fructose metabolism.
Okay.
Which that's the genetic piece.
So there is a hereditary piece, but that just means you got to watch it more.
Yeah,
I love that.
Those people can be fructose sensitive, which if you have heard that term before, it means they're extra susceptible to fructose. It can cause a lot of effects in their body, and they're predisposed to gout. And actually, the association between sugar intake and gout was discovered in the 1960s. Okay. They did research. They started saying, like, hey, there's this big correlation between sugar intake and gout. But at the same time, allopurinol was a medication that was discovered right at that same time period. Oh. It lowers uric acid levels.
I know it's coming down the tunnel.
And it allows people to eat and drink whatever they want and not suffer the effects from gout.
And then you can still eat sugar.
So they started doing this research, and they were getting into why gout is caused by sugar, and they were doing all the lab. But then pretty much they found this medication, and then all of the research started to be poured into this medication. Because why? Because medications make money.
Make more money than self-control to not have sugar.
Yeah, exactly. So then all the research switched over to studying not just allopurinol in terms of how it could affect gout, but then what other effects it could have within the body. And the NIH kind of cut their funding to gout. And they were like, no, focus on this medication, because why would you care if you can just have this medication and then you can eat whatever you want and drink
still have your brownie
want.
batter in the freezer.
Exactly. Yep. why even put time into discovering what causes gout? We've solved the symptoms.
We're finding in the Renegade Nutrition community here that honestly the better way is not the easier way. That it really is simple, hard, but that's why we're renegades, right? You got to do it a little harder way. Yep.
So NIH funding dried up. Get rid of that.
Boom.
Medical journals focused on printing articles pertaining to drug therapy with allopurinol, and then even after that, years later, sugars and sweets are still included in many lists of low purine foods recommended to people with gout.
This is fascinating. This is also fascinating. When anyone I know is at the hospital, they had some surgery going on, and then their plate of food comes out, and it's like the Jell-O and the cake and I'm like, this is hospital food? Is this okay?
You know this is what put you in the hospital.
I know, right? I mean, there's like so many sides to it, but come on.
Yeah.
Come on. Yeah.
So that's the effect of sugar on gout. And so for many people that follow a low purine diet that aren't finding freedom from gout, I think eliminating sugar in all of its forms, and especially fructose sugar, which is hard because that's the type of sugar that's in fruit. But if you can eliminate that from your diet.
Even fruit, I did not. My brain did not register that. I was thinking high fructose corn syrup. That's out of my diet.
That is out of the question.
That is definitely. But even fruit sugars.
If you are suffering from gout, and it's not like I recommend eliminating fruit in general. For
right. Still has good vitamins. Right. I agree.
But if you are suffering from a crippling disorder like gout, where you are in so much pain, it's worth it.
Do the food journal. Mm-hmm. Pay attention to when it happened. I totally get it. Yeah. Jump to a food journal really quick. If someone were to do a food journal to check in any disease how something's affecting them, how long should they wait in that food journal? I ate it now. How long until the effects to know?
It really depends.
It depends. Okay.
It depends on if they have a food sensitivity to it, and then what type of sensitivity they have.
Okay.
If it's like an IgE E,
Okay.
then that's an immediate reaction. That's when people get hives and swelling and
Okay.
their throat closes up and they need an EpiPen.
That one's easy on the food journal.
Yeah, that's easy.
Yep.
You know if you have that.
Don't eat that again.
Yeah.
Yep.
And that's the things like peanuts and shellfish and eggs and that people frequently have reactions to.
Yep.
You know if you have it. The IgG is more of that classic food sensitivity, and that can take days.
Okay.
So when somebody is doing an elimination diet and they're eliminating a food from their diet and then they're adding it back in to see how they feel, then I recommend every 3 days.
Okay.
Add that food in, journal how you feel,
Okay.
wait 3 days, and have start with a small amount, like a teaspoon of that food, and then build up until you're having like that food at every meal.
Okay.
Over the course of 3 days. And then if you still feel fine after 3 days, even 4 days, start adding in the next food.
Okay. So food journal patterning, pay attention.
Yeah. It
really
can take
lean
time.
in.
And gout is one of those things too. It might not be immediate. It could be 24 hours later. It could be 48 hours later. I mean, it depends.
Okay.
It depends on how many things they had and how quickly it triggered it and how much inflammation is already present in their body. And
Yep. Okay.
Yeah,
okay.
So,
we'll also do a food journal podcast. We'll do that.
we'll do. That's a good one. That would be a good one. So moving on to hypertension. So hypertension, I really wanted to talk about because salt, pig salt, is the food that gets blamed the most.
Definitely does.
And
at my house, we say, don't have too much salt, it'll give you a heart attack.
Yeah, yes. Salt and red meat. Okay, so I'm going to go into that.
Okay.
That's really interesting and kind of the history of that and how that came to be the popular conception around hypertension. And then I'm going to talk about the sugar piece of it. So I go into hypertension from gout because high uric acid concentrations, like what happens in gout, in the blood can damage blood vessels that lead into the kidneys.
Okay.
And this is because insulin, which is the hormone released in response to sugar intake, to blood sugar in like elevation, your body releases insulin. It helps break down the glucose and it helps your cells take it in. So insulin signals the kidneys to retain uric acid.
Okay.
So if you eat a lot of sugar and your blood sugar becomes elevated and you have a lot of insulin being released, that insulin is telling your kidneys to retain uric acid, which again is part of that combination.
Dang.
Yeah, and then because the kidneys help regulate our blood pressure, damage to the blood vessels that lead to the kidneys can result in dysregulation and hypertension.
Okay.
And sugar consumption raises uric acid concentration, so it stands to reason that sugar consumption directly causes hypertension and can result in kidney damage, kidney disease, which is one of the many complications of diabetes, interestingly enough. So the way our kidneys regulate our blood pressure is basically they increase urination when your blood pressure gets too high. So you can think about it like if your blood vessels can only hold so much fluid.
Yep.
And then the more fluid they have, the more tension is put on those blood vessels, the higher your blood pressure is. And so your kidneys help reduce the amount of fluid in your body so that those vessels can relax.
Okay.
You know, it's just like filling a water balloon.
Yep.
And you fill it too full and it's like about to burst, so you need to like squeeze it and let some of the water out.
Yes.
That's like what your kidneys do.
Yes.
Releasing pee through your pee hole.
Yep.
This is the scientific way to
bathroom break. Yeah.
So that's a diuretic effect. So when they talk about drugs that cause a diuretic effect, what they mean is they make you go to the bathroom more.
To release that pressure.
Exactly.
Okay.
So insulin is an anti-diuretic, so it reduces urination.
I did not know that.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So insulin can disturb the electrolyte balance because it prevents the kidneys from being able to eliminate salt in water.
It all comes back around.
And then that increases your blood pressure.
So this is another correlation causation problem.
Yeah, so I mean, imagine the problem that's posed when people become insulin resistant.
Yeah.
And their bodies become increasingly non-responsive to insulin. So when you become insulin resistant, your body has to produce more and more and more insulin in order for it to take effect.
Yep.
Because the cells become kind of
just numb to it. We don't care. We don't care anymore.
Exactly. Yep. And so your body produces more and more. So when you become insulin resistant, now your body's producing higher and higher levels of insulin. And so now it is having a more and more significant anti-diuretic effect, and then it contributes more and more to that hypertension.
Yep.
So unfortunately, salt intake is far more commonly vilified as the dietary trigger of hypertension. I don't think I know. I mean, I don't have hypertension, so I've never talked to my doctor about it, but I have not had any of my patients come to me and be like, okay, I have high blood pressure and my doctor told me to cut out sugar.
Okay.
They're like, I have high blood pressure, so my doctor put me on a low salt diet.
Yep.
I mean,
which, not to mention, processed foods have way more salt put on them than we would eat in just a normal whole food diet.
Right.
Yep.
And even the DASH diet is the most common. DASH dash is the most. It's the dietary approach to stopping hypertension.
Just something. Okay. Yep. Okay. Just,
I don't know. It's been a while since I've looked it up. But the DASH diet is the most commonly prescribed diet with hypertension.
Okay.
It is all about eliminating salt. It's low salt
is their
foods.
concept. And you're like, you're missing the point, folks.
Yes. And it's,
Your
there's
body.
other, like, there's a lot of other aspects to
triggering,
it. But it's focused on reducing salt intake.
Okay.
Which the idea behind that is that salt transiently or temporarily does increase our blood pressure.
Okay.
So salt intake, if you think about osmosis in the body, you have more salt, so then there's more fluids to match the salt balance, to balance that out, because our body has to maintain this very fine regulation of how much fluids and solutes, solvents and solutes
keep
are
the
present.
engine running.
Yeah.
Yep.
So it maintains this fine homeostasis. So the more salt there is, the more fluid there needs to be, and the more fluid, the higher your blood pressure. So temporarily, salt intake, especially a large amount of salt intake, can increase your blood pressure.
Okay.
And so the theory behind salt being an agent that caused hypertension was, well, if people eat too much salt over too long a period, their blood pressure is chronically elevated.
Okay.
And so that's what causes hypertension.
Okay.
But they have since been unable to demonstrate
Link it
actual clinical
in more
studies.
of a chronic sense. Got it.
Yeah, they can show it that it does happen in the short term. And so certainly, if somebody is at risk of having a heart attack, I'm not going to go eat a bunch of salt.
Yeah, don't eat salt. Don't do that. Yeah. Yeah, right.
But for the average population, they have been unable to demonstrate any clinical effect that salt has on hypertension in the long term.
Okay.
But so delving into that history of hypertension. So until the 1920s, hypertension wasn't even necessarily considered, this is really interesting. This was so interesting to me to read. So hypertension wasn't even necessarily considered a bad thing until the 1920s.
Okay.
Because the idea was, I mean, really, your body raises your blood pressure for a reason.
Okay.
And so before the 1920s, the doctors were looking at hypertension as like, oh, okay, this person needs more oxygen delivered to certain tissues, so their body is raising their blood pressure. That's natural. That's a good thing. Why would you try and stop that process, right? Because your body regulates itself. It's regulating itself. Okay. Yeah, it's obviously indicative of a problem.
Yeah.
But the idea of trying to solve the problem by lowering blood pressure,
root cause,
like that wasn't a thing.
Aha.
So then in the 1920s, it was life insurance actuaries that first did what would become the definitive research on hypertension.
Oh, I'll come back to money, Eleni. I'll come back to money.
A life insurance actuary, so aka companies with money on the line regarding hypertension. So basically what I had to look up what an actuary was. I didn't know what they did, but they analyze financial risk to insurance companies.
Yep.
That's what they do.
Yep.
And they're statisticians, not scientists.
5 times fast. Okay. Yes.
Not scientists. Not doctors, not physiologists, not pathologists. They are math wizards.
Yes.
Specifically statistics wizards.
Yes.
Who specialize in mortality and calculate human longevity based on medical and behavioral averages. Then they price those like behaviors and those like medical things. They price those out to insurance companies so that they can form their profitability model. So these are the people who were doing the initial research on hypertension.
And made it a thing.
And like certain diseases can be quantifiably measured in terms of cost. So like it's guesstimation. I mean, these guys aren't scientific professionals.
Right.
I mean, maybe they're looking at research, but they're not themselves health professionals. So,
and that's another correlation, but not causation.
Yeah. So these life insurance actuaries, they were the first ones. They basically gave us a bunch of unambiguous facts about blood pressure, Like things like that. Your blood pressure increases with age and weight, and your weight increases with age. Like, okay.
Yeah.
So among the middle-aged men a century ago,
Okay.
I mean, this was 1920.
Yep.
Now we're in 2021.
Yep.
So this was a century ago. Among those people who were applying for life insurance and considered themselves healthy enough to do so.
Okay.
Because you only applied for life insurance if you were like healthy. At that point, you couldn't qualify if you were actively dying.
Yep.
So among those people, the average systolic blood pressure was below 140 millimeters of mercury, which is still today our cut point.
Okay.
So systolic blood pressure.
Okay.
140.
I wish I knew more about medical things. Yes, keep talking about
So
that.
as blood pressure increased above 140, then they found that lifespan decreased. So insurance companies didn't want to insure people who had a systolic blood pressure above 140.
Okay.
So systolic blood pressure of 140 was established as the cutoff for
and that
diagnosing
was
hypertension.
healthy middle age. Oh, interesting.
That-
so the baseline is too low.
100 years ago, an insurance company looked at people, said the average of these men
Yep.
is 140. Systolic blood pressure is 140. Anything above that, they start to notice other health problems, like which you're not, if you're above that and you're overweight and you have higher blood pressure, like think about all the things that are associated with being obese.
Yes.
So it doesn't necessarily have anything to do with your increased blood pressure. It has a lot to do with being overweight.
Yep. The whole system.
But that became the cutoff. 140 systolic blood pressure of 140 became the cutoff. That's still today. You go to your medical doctor, they take your blood pressure like, oh, systolic's above 140, you have to be put on medication. But that number never even came from actual science or medical research. It came from life insurance companies.
Yes.
Just
we know
like-
who runs the world. Money runs the world.
Let that sink in for a minute. Like,
Yep.
I was like, I cannot tell you how many people I've seen that they're like, oh, my blood pressure's high, so I'm on blood pressure medication, and it's nonsense. Like,
You're right, it is
what
not that
number
bad.
is
Don't do
based
it.
on.
Okay.
Nonsense.
Okay. Push
So
it.
that is just so funny to me, like reading that.
How
was
interesting
mind-blowing.
to even know the history of that. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. That's good.
And outside of the United States, like in this 1920 area where they were like, oh, your blood pressure gets higher as you get older.
Yeah.
That was true in the United States,
Okay.
which lived a Western lifestyle. But outside of the United States, in other like countries that didn't have that Western lifestyle, people's blood pressure remained stable their entire lives. So it did not increase as they
That
got older.
is fascinating. That's fascinating. I love comparing our nation's health to others and what. Okay.
Yeah.
That's another podcast. We got a
So
lot.
this,
Okay.
yes,
Mhm.
there's no shortage of episodes.
Yes.
So in the 1960s, based on what they knew about the transient effects of salt and blood pressure.
Okay.
So like eating salt acutely raises your blood pressure in that moment. Based on
Okay.
what they knew about that, researchers in the U.S. started to fixate on salt.
Okay.
That was in the 1960s
Okay.
because they knew, and then there was another interesting thing is like because salt consumption increases your blood pressure, you become thirsty because
Okay.
your body wants to flush that salt out, which is why so
Oh.
many bars provide salty snacks.
Then you drink
So
more.
you drink more.
A smart business plan. That's actually
Uh,
brilliant. That's actually brilliant.
Okay. So, anyway, so they began to fixate on salt, and in the U.S. on research with hypertension, fixated on salt. Outside of the U.S. at that same time, researchers were studying increased prevalence of hypertension in nomadic tribes.
Okay.
And they were in Uganda, Kenya, and then they were focusing on South Pacific Islanders. They were studying the association between sugar and white flour consumption and hypertension.
I want to know.
That's what their research was focusing on. But once those researchers learned that researchers in the U.S. were focusing on salt, they started focusing on salt. And they got rid of all their research on the other stuff.
Peer pressure.
Yeah, well, and because
Yep.
I think like the U.S. was maybe for unknown reasons to me seen as like an authority figure.
Yep.
And
Yep.
so they were like, oh, they're fixating on salt. We're gonna.
We
do the same
better
thing.
keep up with
Uh-huh.
the Joneses, which
Mhm. So then in 1988, a study called InterSalt was established specifically to test the association between salt and blood pressure and to prove the theory that salt intake causes hypertension. So they focused on that study specifically on salt, and they studied Aboriginal tribes and showed that over the years, as salt consumption went up, so did blood pressure. Of correlation.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so salt
Mhm.
consumption goes up, so does blood pressure. But they completely neglected the fact that these Aboriginal tribes had also drastically increased their sugar and white flour intake. And they weren't studying those components. So they were looking
Yep.
at salt only. They didn't care about the sugar and
The
the flour
skewed-
also going up.
Yep.
So they're like, oh, as salt intake increases, so does hypertension. Salt causes hypertension.
Egg.
Interesting.
That is true. That in the study you can find what you're looking for.
Yeah,
Yep.
exactly. And that study framed the recommendations that people still receive from their doctors today.
So as for us on the Renegade podcast, this is a little bit of a challenge, and we of course cannot give medical advice. I certainly cannot give medical advice, but to just give the lesser sugar lifestyle a chance, and
Yeah.
I think you'll find amazing results. And of course, consult a doctor, check all that out. You know what I'm saying? But you
Yeah.
know what? Cut your brownies a little bit. I'm just saying.
It's like the disclaimer is I'm not giving nothing on this podcast constitutes medical advice.
No, it doesn't.
It doesn't constitute medical advice. Always talk to your doctor before you make any changes. But honestly, you'll probably know about hypertension after this episode than your doctor knows.
Oh, fair.
Just kidding. Just saying. I'm just saying.
That is fair.
But nothing constitutes medical advice. Don't go stop taking your high blood pressure medication.
No,
That's
keep
not
doing
what we're saying.
Keep doing it. Keep doing all the
Not
things
what
we're
I'm
saying.
saying. Keep doing all the things. Talk to your doctor.
But question your sugar.
Check yourself
Check
before you wreck
yourself
yourself.
with you before you eat a chocolate chip cookie. That's not.
Yeah. And so in reality, since then, clinical studies have failed to demonstrate any sort of benefit of salt elimination on blood pressure. And in fact, systematic studies have shown that cutting salt intake in half at most decreases your blood pressure by 4 to 5 millimeters mercury in patients with hypertension and 2 millimeters mercury in patients without hypertension. And stage 1 hypertension is an increase in blood pressure of at least 20 millimeters of mercury.
That got a little nerdy, but
Above
you just
140.
translate that for me.
So basically, in stage 1 hypertension, that's classified by if your blood pressure is 20 above 140 systolic. So if you're at like 160.
Okay.
So cutting your salt intake in half at most reduces blood pressure by 4 to 5. So
Okay.
it doesn't even move you out of stage 1 hypertension remotely. So if you were at 160 millimeters mercury and you cut your salt consumption in half, you could go down to 155 at most.
And still above.
And you're still
Yep.
hypertensive.
Yep.
And only 2 millimeters mercury in patients without hypertension. So it's meaningless. I mean, that's the most they've been able to demonstrate that reducing salt intake helps. And I think the problem with other studies is anytime you remove somebody from a Western diet, you're reducing their salt intake.
Yes.
Because they're not eating so many processed foods,
Yes.
packaged foods, crappy foods, which are
Right.
laden with salt.
Yes.
And at the same time, they're reducing their sugar and white flour intake.
Yep.
So it all goes hand in hand. And so it's easy to look at like, oh, as they move away from that diet, then their blood pressure goes down. So therefore the salt is the problem. But in reality, it's eating healthier in general reduces
Yep.
your blood pressure. So in individuals that have salt sensitivity, which by the way is caused by insulin resistance, then salt does have a dramatic effect in blood pressure.
Okay.
So if you have salt sensitivity and your insulin resistance, then salt can affect blood pressure more.
And that's that bio-individuality to knowing your body, food journal, figure out what affects you. Take the test. Yep. Do what's right for your body. Yep.
So I'm not saying go eat a bunch of salt, but I thought that was interesting.
That is interesting.
Okay, so then heart disease, how are we doing?
We're doing good.
Like we're getting into it.
Heart disease is actually, I'm interested in this, it runs in my family. So I am all ears for this one. Boop.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, mine too. So heart disease, besides sugar intake causing hypertension, sugar plays other roles in heart disease, specifically in atherosclerosis and the accumulation of plaques in arteries.
Okay.
So,
boom.
For far too long, this is one of the things that drives me just batty.
Yes.
Dietary cholesterol intake has been blamed for elevated blood cholesterol and atherosclerosis, even though study after study since the 1970s has been unable to find causation between dietary cholesterol intake and heart disease risk, because there's always other factors.
Okay.
There's always other variables in those studies, so you cannot. Correlation is not causation.
Yes. Yeah.
However,
just clues. Yep.
they forget that like sugar is an important part of forming triglycerides. So anytime people like doctors see that you have high triglycerides, they tell you to reduce red meat. But sugar is also part of that molecule.
Okay, wait. I used to always have high triglycerides.
Have you tested recently?
I have not, because COVID threw a wrench on that. I had a yearly. Interesting. I will check now. I will check.
It'll be interesting to see.
Oh, no one has ever told me this is a.
Yeah. So sugar is, if people have chronically high triglycerides, it's almost always sugar.
So fascinating. Okay, fascinating.
So increased sugar in the bloodstream is what is actually responsible for our high cholesterol levels. So because your cells need cholesterol,
Okay.
it's literally what your cell membrane is made of. So every cell in your body, every part of every tissue, organ, and gland is made of cholesterol. That's what forms the cell wall.
Okay.
So
We do need some cholesterol.
You need a lot of cholesterol.
Okay.
So when a cell is damaged and needs to be repaired, or if a cell dies and needs to be replaced,
Okay.
then whatever tissue that cell belongs to is going to put out signal to your body, to your liver, specifically to release cholesterol. So it's like, hey, dead cell over here, I need to replace it. I need cholesterol because I need to build.
Fix me up.
Or like there's damage over here, I need cholesterol. So it signals to your liver like, hey, send me some cholesterol. Your liver is like, okay.
Doop, boop, boop. Making cholesterol.
That is what I do.
It is what I do.
And then your cells have
Okay.
cholesterol receptors into which those cholesterol molecules fit like a little puzzle piece.
This is fascinating.
So it has
I
a
love that you
receptor.
know this. Okay.
You know this.
Yes.
So it calls for cholesterol, and then it has a receptor that recognizes that cholesterol molecule. So your liver is like, okay, I'm going to release some cholesterol. That cholesterol travels through the bloodstream. That cell
Okay.
receptor is like, oh, yep, there's the cholesterol.
There it is.
I recognize it, and it takes it up, and it utilizes it.
Okay.
So as you can imagine, like your body needs cholesterol all the time because
Okay.
you're constantly replacing and repairing and rebuilding cells.
Okay.
So you are constantly releasing cholesterol, and if you didn't have cholesterol, you would be dead.
Okay.
You'd be real dead.
Be real dead.
Real dead. So then that's the process in a healthy body.
Okay.
But when you have elevated blood sugar,
Okay.
sugar molecules have that crystalline structure.
Gosh, dang it.
Yeah.
Yes.
Can you?
This is
you
me
can
2 years
already
ago.
Picture what I'm
I'm
gonna
having
say.
yes. This is me. I'm having post traumatic 2 years ago. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah. So you have a bunch of sugar in your bloodstream, and then as that cholesterol molecule, which is light and fluffy and fatty, travels through it, those sugar molecules are like stabby knives, and they damage that cholesterol molecule. And it makes it like
Savage.
harder. Yeah, it's
Okay.
savage. Yeah, exactly.
Our internal savage. Yes.
Yeah. So then by the time that cholesterol molecule reaches that cell receptor, it's like unrecognizable.
No.
And so that receptor doesn't take up the cholesterol. Your body can't use it to rebuild that cell. And eventually that cell is like, excuse me.
No one helped me,
Nobody
and I
helped
called
me.
for help.
I needed cholesterol.
Liver, where are you at? Liver's
And
like,
then
I did my job.
Yeah, they send another message to the liver. Your liver releases more cholesterol.
Ugh. Who was under a microscope learning all this? Oh my word.
I know.
This-
It's fascinating.
This is fascinating.
So
There needs to be a little Bill Nye science lesson on this.
yes,
Okay.
yes.
Yep.
Or like that Osmosis Jones where they got like real small and like went inside that guy's. You never saw it.
No, I didn't.
I don't recommend it. It's not Bill Murray at his finest. It's gross. Anyway,
That's fair.
yeah, but they go like
Interesting.
intracellular.
Okay, so then when your sugar, is it too much sugar? Then that's that savage cells inside of you, or they're being savage.
It's damaging the cholesterol.
You gotta
so
get that sugar
cholesterol
out.
doesn't get taken up.
Okay.
It keeps circulating through the bloodstream, and
Okay.
then your liver keeps releasing cholesterol into the bloodstream because your tissues
Trying to link
need
to
it.
the cells. Yep.
And so, if you have too much sugar, you have higher blood levels of cholesterol. And then as those sugar molecules, or as they damage the cholesterol, then that cholesterol gets really dense. And
Okay.
that's that like very dense
Got it. Packing in.
It's
Yep.
packs. That's
Yep.
what starts to form plaques in your arteries. So the fluffy, healthy
Oh.
cholesterol does not form plaques in the arteries because it's like light and fluffy.
Yeah.
They don't fit tight together. But when
Yeah.
they're smaller and damaged,
The damage.
they start packing in really tight together. That's what can cause those plaques.
This is so fascinating. I feel like it is the magic school trip. It's like the magic school bus. This is awesome. Okay, I love it.
So
I love it.
as an example of that, I worked with a patient, in the chiropractic clinic. He came to me. He had what I considered high cholesterol, which is an LDL 3 times or more
Okay.
his HDL. So
Okay.
your HDL is your good, quote unquote, your good cholesterol. Your
Mhm.
LDL is your quote unquote bad cholesterol. None of it's actually bad or good. It's all
Just
necessary.
balance. Yep.
But your LDL shouldn't be more than 3 times your HDL. That's my cutoff for what I consider clinically significant and
Okay.
dangerous.
Okay.
So this guy had that. He had an LDL that was 3 times his HDL. His HDL was too low. It was like in the 40s. I'd like to see it in the 70s.
Okay.
And his LDL was like 150,
Okay.
that was high for his HDL. So
Okay.
if he could get his HDL to the 70s, then I'm not so worried about that LDL of 150. But I also know it will naturally go down if I can get his HDL up.
Got it.
So he came to me and he asked what he should do, and he brought, the sheet of typical recommendations of, eliminating salt and eliminating red meats and eating like lean proteins and
your
And-
cookie after the meal. Yeah. Yeah.
Cookie.
And your cookie.
I was like, listen, cut out sugar.
Okay.
If that's all you're going to do, cut out sugar. He
One
already
thing.
was eating healthy
Okay.
otherwise, but
Yep.
he was having sugar and flour. And I
Yes.
said, cut that out. Stop having the sugar. Stop having the flour
Yep.
for this time period.
Yes.
And I actually had him stop all grains, which I don't recommend in general for people. But in this case, I recommended it because I was like, okay, well, grains do raise your blood sugar.
Yes. Right.
And so for the sake of getting your numbers down to a safe zone, I want you to cut out all grains. So don't do
And let's just see what happens.
Yeah, because I'm
Yep.
like, that will get your numbers balanced really quickly. Then you can start incorporating those grains again.
Yep.
And keep them balanced.
Yes.
So I had him eliminate all grains. So he was basically eating meat and vegetables and fats. And I had him increase his fat intake because I
Yes.
wanted his HDL to go up. So I wanted him eating meat,
Healthy
and fat,
fats.
and healthy fat.
Yeah.
And I had him start exercising.
Yes.
Because exercise is like the number one thing to raise your HDL. So like start doing some exercises. We figured out what was appropriate for him with his body and fitness level.
Yes.
Eat more fat.
Yep.
Eat no
I
sugar.
love that. Mhm.
Don't have
Yes.
sugar. Don't
Yep.
have the wheat. I even had him minimize fruit. I mean,
Okay.
he was eating very low glycemic fruits, berries, and stuff.
Yes.
So within 6 months, he got another blood test. And he came back to me, and his numbers were like night and day difference.
No, I
Like,
love
night
it
and
so
day
much.
difference. I mean,
love
it was his HDL was in the 70s, which is what I wanted,
Yes.
and his LDL was closer to like 120. Like he literally looked like,
That's incredible.
and his triglycerides went way down,
And he felt
and he felt good, and he lost 12 pounds.
Love it.
I mean, and it was all that was
I'm
it.
sure his energy was good. I'm sure he was glowing.
He looked
Yes.
so good, and then wasn't like having the chronic congestion and other stuff that he'd been having. And he said he told his doctor what he did. His doctor didn't believe him, like because he was like, "There's no way you got your numbers down by eating more fat and meat."
Mm.
I'm
Okay.
All right. Well, he doesn't have to believe you.
Yes.
'cause your
He's like-
numbers speak for themselves. Like
He's like-
you didn't fake it the first time.
Yes.
It's
He's
not
like, then
you
I'm
cheat.
just lying to you. I don't know.
I took a blood sample from a nurse on my
Yes,
way.
yes,
I
yes.
handed in a fake one.
He's like, but look how good I look with my.
So there
That is incredible, and that's cool.
Yeah.
I like it.
Yeah. Okay, and then I want to talk about cancer.
Okay,
Cancer.
hot topic.
Hot topic. So cancer is very much associated with the Western diet and lifestyle. And again, cancer is one of those things that just over the decades, there are so many factors that contribute to cancer.
Right, exactly.
You can't
environmental
put-
toxins, stress,
Exactly.
management. Right, exactly. There's
Vitamin
It's
D.
broad.
Vitamin
Yes.
D. You cannot put people
Yep.
in a vacuum and study cancer. I
Right.
mean, you can't.
so many variables.
So many variables.
I agree. I
And
agree.
genetics and
Yes,
So
yes.
and your gut health. I mean, honestly,
Yes.
hundreds of thousands of variables that affect cancer.
Yes.
And so sugar is only one of them.
Yep.
But it's a significant one. So more than 130 years ago, already cancer prevalence was like steadily increasing.
Okay.
With the progress of civilization. There's that industrial revolution.
Uh-huh.
So cases of cancer.
Damn the man.
cases of cancer in Aboriginal tribes was rare, incredibly rare. And then that drew attention because of the increasing prevalence in industrialized cities. So they started to be like, oh, why aren't these like Aboriginals, why aren't they getting
They don't get cancer like we do.
They started focusing on
right?
it. So, and at the time, the increasing cancer rates were attributed to improved statistical tracking and to physicians paying more attention to it.
Nah.
And they thought, well, the reason people in Aboriginal tribes don't get diagnosed with cancer is because they don't live as long. So they don't live long enough to develop cancer, and they don't go see a doctor to get diagnosed. If they do, that's valid. That's fine. But that was kind of like how it was dismissed.
How they dismissed it, right.
But when they started studying Native American tribes, Native Americans were living longer than white people and still weren't getting cancer.
Thank you.
And they had many doctors.
Blue zone folks.
Blue zones,
all,
and they had many doctors living with them as missionaries who were more than qualified to recognize and diagnose cancer. And so they basically had to stop blaming the difference on that and had to start paying attention to it.
Fascinating.
So in 1915, Frederick Hoffman of the American Cancer Society concluded that there were far too many qualified doctors reporting the same things, which was low rates of cancer in Aboriginal and Native American tribes, for it to be dismissed. And he found that in America, cancer was increasing at a rate of 2.7 per year.
Okay.
And at the same time, diabetes was also increasing.
Industrial Revolution. I get it.
And then Albert Schweitzer, who was a Nobel Peace Prize winner, began working at a hospital in West Africa in 1913. And at that time, he recorded in his Albert Schweitzer diary that he was astonished to encounter no cases of cancer.
Fascinating.
But later, he was there for decades, as the natives that he was working with took to living, this is his words, not mine, as the natives took to living more and more after the manner of the whites, he wrote, cancer in the patient population became more and more frequent.
Amen to all of this. I got goosebumps.
Yeah.
I got goosebumps.
Okay, and then here's just a really quick aside that I thought was really cool. I said it over there and I won't go get it, but years ago, my grandfather passed away years ago before I started my nutrition degree, and probably like 8 or 9, 10, maybe 10 years ago, he gave me this book.
Okay. And
this whole series of letters of correspondence between him and Albert Schweitzer, who he was like this big fan of. Yes. Literally, that book that's sitting up there is signed with a note to my grandfather.
No way.
And it's signed to him from Albert Schweitzer. He signed it in 1956. My grandfather gave me that book, gave me his like correspondences between him and Albert. And he had been like, he was just so amazed by Albert Schweitzer, who's this Nobel Peace Prize winner. He won the Nobel Prize in 1952. He was corresponding with my grandpa in 1956. And my grandpa was just like, here's this guy who's like this really amazing.
Yeah. Helping out the world.
And he like wrote me back. So anyway, at the time when my grandpa gave it to me, I was like, I don't know who this guy is. And I kept all of it, of course.
Yeah.
But like I put the book on a shelf. And I haven't revisited it since. And then when I was reading this Case Against Sugar, he starts talking about Albert Schweitzer.
You're like,
and
how do I know that name?
I was like, that name. And so I went downstairs and I found that book and that like
that's
folder
incredible.
from him. And it was just interesting to me at the time because my grandfather was very insistent that I get all his correspondences in that book with Albert Schweitzer. But I was studying environmental science at the time, and I was just I'm like, cool. I don't know who this guy is. But my grandfather and I were really close. We enjoyed looking at our family history. I thought that's why he wanted me to have it, but it gave me goosebumps reading this. Like, here I am, all these, like a decade later, studying this.
That is cool.
And I have this guy, literally like a book about his life that's signed by him.
So cool.
In pen with a note to my grandpa.
That's so cool. I need to touch it afterwards. Okay.
Yeah.
So cool.
Yeah. So I had to throw that in. That's why he's like one of the only people whose names I actually included in any of this, because I was like, I know him.
Santa, I know him.
Okay. So that's that aside. Anyway, so 1950, cancer is still rare in Native American populations. Mm-hmm. Still rare in the 1950s. But cancer here in the U.S. is like exploding.
Yep.
So that is when researchers started to be like, okay, it's got to be diet and lifestyle that's causing cancers. And in 1964, the WHO concluded that most cancers are potentially preventable and are likely a result of diet and lifestyle.
Which I am like, yes. When you said that, I'm like, yes. But I know how offended so many people in my life are when they hear that.
Yeah.
So it's a hard pill to swallow, but I totally agree that the modern lifestyle is no bueno on our health. Like I see that. Yep.
And it's not to say it's the only thing.
Right. Right.
It's one factor that if you are already in a toxic environment and being exposed to toxins at work, or have this genetic predisposition,
right,
or are slathering your skin with all of these toxins,
yes,
right, like all
every
these
day
things contribute. But then when you're eating crappy and you're eating sugar and you're in this
low
chronic
immune system
inflamed-
and stressed,
Yes.
a death by 1,000 cuts.
Yeah. So as an example of this is among Japanese women, breast cancer, at least back in this time period, is extremely rare.
Okay.
But it only takes 2 generations of living in the U.S. for them to develop the same rates of breast cancer as any non-Japanese
yes
culture.
I totally believe it.
Yeah.
Yep.
So we know, obviously, then that cancer is directly correlated with diet and lifestyle, but that information doesn't specifically tell us that sugar is the problem. However,
Yes. Yes.
as far back as 1889.
Okay.
1889.
Great grandpa.
We're taking a trip back now.
Yep.
A British medical journal published an article showing a significant link between type 2 diabetes and cancer.
Okay.
And they showed that people who had type 2 diabetes were way more likely to have these malignant neoplasms.
Okay.
And it wasn't until 2003.
Okay.
So that research back then, 1889,
Yeah.
wasn't until 2003 that epidemiologists in the US began publishing research showing a clear association between sugar intake, diabetes, and cancer.
I feel like they are censored and hidden. Someone is hiding all
Somebody's
of those.
hiding it.
Someone is hiding it.
It's the same with the cholesterol research.
Uh-huh. By the way, censored.
But we're not gonna. That's gonna be the next time. We're gonna get into
Okay.
the history and the propaganda. I'm
Yes.
really excited about that one. We're gonna get. So you will have to stay tuned next time for the history and propaganda of sugar. Anyway,
Yes.
it is fascinating.
Yes. Kellogg, we got you. Okay.
Fascinating.
Yep.
Okay, so they have found that obese men and women are 50 to 60% more likely to die from cancer than those that are at a
Those
healthy weight.
high of numbers.
Yeah.
Oh my word. It really just does show like it's a harder path, but you gotta watch your sugar.
But
You
it's
gotta
worth
watch your
it.
health. You gotta watch the holistic. It's so important.
Yeah.
Renegade-
And in
keeping
2004, the CDC followed up with an analysis that linked pancreatic, colon, liver, bladder, and breast cancers all to diabetes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And especially significant is that individuals who are not obese
Okay.
or diabetic yet, at least, but who are insulin resistant.
Yes.
Insulin resistant have the same increased risk of developing cancer as the obese and the diabetic. So if you're insulin resistant, but you're thin,
Yes.
Which
You
happens.
It does happen.
it
does
happens.
happen.
And more and more and more today.
Yep.
It's becoming more common.
I will say so. My whole life, I've been aware of people's health and how their feelings, how their life experiences, depending on their lifestyle, and a general observation. And I have noticed some thin people having health troubles, and I'm like, what the heck went wrong? What the heck went wrong? Because I know they're active, they're running, they eat veggies, all this, and you know what? It's been out of most of the cases. It really is like. They still loved their M&M candies every day. They still loved their pies after every meal. And that's one of the moments where I was like, is sugar bad? No, sugar not bad.
No.
Sugar might be bad.
Yeah, that's what we call the fat skinny, is the people who
Yes.
metabolically are unhealthy, even though they're thin,
Okay.
but they have all the symptomology of
Of the
somebody's
insulin
overweight.
and the glycemic and
Yeah.
okay, fascinating.
So, yeah. So the higher, what they found since then is that the higher levels of circulating insulin and insulin-like growth factor, which is IGF, I'll call it insulin and IGF,
okay.
which is associated with insulin, the more likely you are to develop cancer. So the higher insulin levels are, the higher your IGF levels are, the more likely you are to develop cancer. Which,
Woo.
by the way,
Mhm.
IGF is similar to insulin. It mimics its effects. It's not insulin, but
Yeah.
it's associated with increased insulin. It's also released, so insulin is released in response to sugar. IGF is released in response to growth hormone.
Okay. Okay.
So that is why we want to be really careful about
Okay.
sourcing our meat and our dairy, that it does not have growth hormones in it, because IGF gets released in response to that increased growth hormone,
Okay.
and IGF higher levels are associated with cancer.
Okay.
Just an interesting tidbit.
Every little thing matters. That's also what I'm figuring out in life. Like, all the little things matter.
Yeah.
Like, there's such the culture where I'm from, like, oh, it doesn't matter. Oh, who cares? But it's like, I even had a friend once, I said, I had my babies have glass bottles because the BPA or whatever. And I remember my girlfriend was like, I don't worry about all that stuff. Kay, you start worrying about that, now you have to worry about everything. And it's too much to worry about. I don't care. And I thought, I don't want to have the I don't care mindset. I want to have the I'm going to fix all I can at the time, do best what I can at the moment that I can, make all the changes I can. Anyway.
Absolutely. Yeah, I have microplastics as an episode for us to talk about.
Yes.
That is really fascinating.
That is fascinating.
BPA and
now in our bodies.
All the microplastics. Anyway.
Yep.
Yeah. Yes, I have that as an episode.
Fascinating.
So anyway, in the 1960s, so here's where cancer and insulin correlate. So in the 1960s, cancer researchers found that cancer cells require insulin in order to propagate, and that insulin triggers cell proliferation in tumors. So what's interesting is they were studying breast cancer, and they found that healthy breast cells don't have insulin receptors, but cancerous breast cells do.
Fascinating.
So they develop these insulin receptors, and they seem to feed off of insulin. So the higher your insulin is, aka the more sugar you're eating, the more you're feeding those cancer cells, the faster they can proliferate. And it's this really interesting cycle in which it becomes more of a metabolic disease, because there's increased levels of insulin, which triggers increased uptake of glucose, which is the fuel. Sugar. Sugar is the fuel for precancerous cells.
Okay.
That's not a theory. That's been shown. Sugar is the fuel. And cancer cells convert sugar into fuel, by the way, in a process that doesn't require oxygen. So cancer cells don't require oxygen. Healthy cells do require oxygen.
I get my big breath for that.
That's why it's so important to breathe and to move your body and to get your blood flowing, because when you don't move and you're stagnant and you're sedentary, your cancer cells, they don't care.
They don't care,
they
but
don't
your
need
healthy
oxygen,
cells.
but your healthy cells do.
Oh, fascinating.
Yeah, interesting.
This is so fascinating to me because it's bringing like everything we know, right? It's like, don't eat sugar, exercise, get your sleep. Like, all of this is like basic knowledge, but everyone just ignores. And or just doesn't give much weight to. And to be like, no, guys, look, like, this is a science to it.
Yeah.
And I just want to be one of the people that's like, okay, I listened and I made changes in my life to follow this. So renegades, listen and make changes in your life as good as you can. I mean, you still might be hit by a bus one day. We don't know, but like, you know what I'm saying? Control what you can.
Yeah, you might be sugar free, but you can't.
You can still get hit by a bus. So yeah. Wild.
Yeah.
It's so interesting because at one point I was like, we're going to get in trouble for sharing this. It's what I truly had that thought, and I thought, but you know what? Truth is truth.
Yeah.
And gosh, if you can just take out some candy bars out of your life, what harm is that? You're going to feel better. You're going to better your odds. I mean, come on.
Wait until we get into the politics and the propaganda of it from the sugar industry. Then we're really going to get shut down. But that's my whole thing, right? I'm going to share the information. Iowa, if you're going to prevent me from being able to practice my profession and I can't work one-on-one with people, fine. I'm going to work with people on a large scale.
Yes.
And I'm going to disseminate this information as far and wide as I can.
Yes.
And if you want to shut me down, that's fine.
That's fine.
I've got like 1,000 names I can start a new podcast under.
Yes, right. Yes,
no shortage of names.
Yes, that's right.
And Instagram handles.
The nutritioner.
Renegade nutritionee.
Yeah.
Okay,
that
so
is wild.
Here's the cycle. So the more glucose a cancer cell metabolizes, the more free radicals it generates.
Yep, that's why I eat all my blueberries, by the way. Go ahead.
There you go.
Yep,
Antioxidants. Free radicals damage cellular DNA.
Okay.
So the more cellular DNA is damaged, the more mutations occur. The more mutations occur, the more likely that one of those mutations will enable the cell to shut off apoptosis, which is that programmed cell death, which is what every cell in your body is programmed to die once it stops being effective. Then it gets cleared by your body, and then a healthy cell can take its place.
Okay.
But cancer cells have developed a mutation where they shut off that programmed cell death, and they don't die. So they're weak and like unhealthy, but they keep
mutating
and mutating and
multiplying.
Your body can't get rid of them, which is what causes tumors. Those build up the cells. So the more sugar you consume, the higher glucose is, the higher insulin is, the more you feed those cancer cells. Oh, well, there goes the video. I guess we ran out of space.
Okay.
We know we've reached our limit. Well, now those poor people who are trying to watch us on YouTube are going to be like, get your shit together.
Get more memory. Delete more videos.
That's after I went through and deleted all thousand chicken videos. Anyway, okay. No, anyway, all right. But you're still listening to us as far as we know here on our
podcast of Renegade Nutrition.
Okay, so
Back
anyway.
from our sponsors.
This is where we would insert an ad if we were like popular enough to be sponsored by anybody to have an ad. This is where I put in the ad.
Here come to Coca-Cola.
Sponsored by
Butterfinger.
Oh God. Anyway, so that's the process. So you fuel your cells with cancer-causing sugar.
Yep.
And they start generating those free radicals. They damage themselves and the cells around them. Mutations occur. Some of those mutations allow apoptosis, or that programmed cell death, to shut off. And then they can start multiplying. And then they draw more sugar and more damage and more reactive oxygen species, and all of that starts happening.
Fascinating. I love this perspective on cancer because I was raised like, oh, we'll never find a cure. If you can find a cure to cancer, you'll save the world. I remember in school, what do you want to be when I grow up? I want to solve cancer. And I remember coming across a nutritionist being like, okay, well, here's 10 things you could do today to lessen your chances. And I remember being like, no, they'll come up with a drug to cure cancer.
Yeah.
But it's like, within our control, there are preventable things, and anyway, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and drugs make money, so
yep.
That's always going to be what people default to, as we saw in the case of that allopurinol or whatever.
Yes.
With gout.
Yep.
Is that people are going to focus on drugs if they can, because pharmaceuticals make money.
Yep.
And they're easier, and you don't have to change your lifestyle.
It's easier, and you kind of think, oh, here's my answer. Thank you. Here's my answer, instead of that harder way of like, oh, I got to check my diet.
Yeah.
Yeah. Gotta get rid of my brownie batter in my freezer. No, thank you.
No, thank you.
No, thank you.
Yeah. So anyway, then they've demonstrated this, in people who are insulin sensitive, which are like people, it's basically the opposite of insulin resistant. So people that overreact to insulin, they're at far greater risk of developing cancer because their cancer cells don't require high levels of insulin to propagate because they're more sensitive to insulin in the first place.
Okay.
So anyway, that's the interesting thing. And that to me is like, especially consumption of high fructose corn syrup, we know causes insulin resistance.
Okay, yes.
And so clearly that insulin resistance having a direct connection to the development of cancer, but you will not hear that.
From the doctor's office, I know.
Because of the sugar industry.
It's crazy.
All right, this is the last one for us to go over is dementia and Alzheimer's.
Oh, I'm in it. And
the connection
I can't remember what we were talking about, but go ahead. But ching.
Okay, so Alzheimer's risk doubles every 5 years after you turn 60. So for every 5 years you live after you turn 60, your risk of developing Alzheimer's doubles.
Okay.
Statistically speaking. Obviously that has a lot to do with your environment and your genetics and your diet and your lifestyle.
Mm-hmm.
But
the population as a whole in America probably.
Yeah. So Alzheimer's, like cancer, is associated with type 2 diabetes.
Okay.
And this association has been confirmed over multiple large studies since the 1990s. It's also associated with obesity, waist circumference, and elevated insulin levels.
Okay.
Alzheimer's is. And individuals with type 2 diabetes have about 2 times the risk of developing Alzheimer's as non-diabetic individuals.
Okay.
And it's so linked that they've actually started calling Alzheimer's type 3 diabetes.
Okay.
Is the correlation there. So one theory behind, one theory behind how this works with Alzheimer's is that higher blood sugar causes higher oxidative stress in the brain.
Okay.
So oxidative stress causes the formation of what we call AGEs, which are advanced glycation end products, which is like you see that like in the pan if you caramelize sugar.
Okay.
Or brown meat. So if you've ever like browned meat and it starts to like get that nice crispy.
Yes.
So that's actually sadly. That is actually like an age, which is this glycated end product, which is actually pretty bad for you. So health
They.
experts recommend that you actually like slow and low cook meat.
Okay, I have since done that in the last year. I've
Yeah.
started doing that.
That's the recommendation
Yeah.
for why you do that, because the caramelization process creates ages, and ages can cause all sorts of issues. But interestingly, sugar in the body can also be heated up and converted into those ages that caramelize. So that same like caramelization
Yeah.
process that you see, it's like that's happening in your body. And ages are associated with the formation of amyloid plaques and neurofibrillary tangles, which are what are found in the brains of patients with Alzheimer's.
Fascinating.
So that's what they've said, those like tangles and those plaques that build up. It's like they build up in the brains of everybody, but healthy individuals can break them down and remove them.
Okay.
People with Alzheimer's, it's like they build up at such a far rate that they can't keep up with it anymore, and they think that's part of what causes the dementia.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Very interesting.
So that's the piece with sugar. And then another theory is that fat cells are inflammatory. That's not a theory. We know that fat cells are inflammatory, but because people who consume more sugar tend to be more overweight, then they have more inflammatory fat cells, and then that causes oxidative stress in the brain and then causes dementia.
Okay. Yep.
Or that also like the insulin is crucial in our brain for signaling and activity. So dysregulation of insulin in people who have insulin resistance and diabetes can create those plaques and tangles, and not only cause Alzheimer's, but a whole host of mood disorders.
I feel that. And a little side note, doing my food journal, I added like even mood and feelings, not only how physically I felt, but how like mentally I felt. And if I go on me a little sugar bender, the next day I am a moody mama. And you can talk to my kids about that. They're like, what is wrong with you? And I'm like, I had a cookie. No, not necessarily. But like, it is so true that I'll start getting a little moody and I have to really think, okay, what did you eat? Go fix yourself. Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. And type 2 diabetes and hypertension are both significantly associated with increased risk of cerebrovascular disease and stroke. And in the case of stroke and dementia, what the importance of that is that if you have a blood clot in one area of your brain,
Okay.
you lose blood flow to those tissues can die. That can cause dementia.
Okay.
So that's different. The dementia that comes after stroke is different than the slow onset of dementia with Alzheimer's,
Chronic.
but it's another way in which sugar causes dementia.
Okay. Yep.
So there we go.
Woo-wee.
That was a deep dive. We talked for so long, my phone ran out of memory.
Yes.
Again, so sorry for our YouTube listeners who now for the second time in a row are
We will
cut
fix
off.
that.
We'll
We will
figure it.
fix
Well, give us a break.
Give
we
us
don't
a break.
We don't know anything about technology.
We don't know
It's
anything.
a miracle that every
Yes.
episode is recorded.
Yes,
so far,
yes,
I'm just
yes.
waiting for the episode that doesn't.
Like, second round.
So, I mean, honestly, in conclusion, basically, the more sugar we consume, the more insulin resistant we become. The higher our blood sugar and blood insulin levels get. With this, our blood pressure increases, we get fatter, we become pre-diabetic or diabetic. We start to suffer from the diseases associated with diabetes and insulin resistance, such as gout, heart disease, cancer, Alzheimer's, blood vessel damage, strokes, dementia, kidney disease, blindness, cataracts, nerve disorders, neuropathy, plaque deposits in the arteries of the heart or the legs, accumulation of ages in the collagen of our skin, making us look old and wrinkly,
Oh,
and in
dang
our
it.
brains, giving
Dang.
us Alzheimer's,
Yep.
or in our joints, causing joint pain and need for surgery, mitochondrial dysfunction, etc.
Etc. Oh my word. Well, if you would have told me this in our nutritional meetings years ago, I would have promptly stopped sugar. Like, I have a new pizzazz now in my life to stop sugar. So now coming back full circle and now giving a little now I'm like, okay, I'm super done with sugar. Two really quick questions if we still have time on this.
I'm sure we do.
Number one, what are some practical you know how they say in the psychology of habits and change, you need a replacement. What are some okay replacements, even in stages?
Mm-hmm.
Stage 1, let me have my maple syrup, right? Or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
What are your tips and tricks, advice from a nutritionist to get us on a better path? Because if you tell me to quit cold turkey, I ain't gonna do it.
Yeah, so it depends. It does depend on the person
Okay.
and their relationship with sugar.
Okay.
Because there
From
are
an addict.
Yeah,
Yes.
there are
Yep.
people who are legit addicted to it,
Mhm.
and honestly, for people who have an emotional, I mean, everybody
Yes.
sugar is addictive. That's part of our next episode. I'll talk about how sugar is actually scientifically shown to be more addictive than cocaine.
Mm-hmm.
Cocaine. That's nuts.
I
Anyway.
choose sugar every time over,
Sugar.
over
Yeah.
cocaine.
Over cocaine.
Yeah.
So-
yes.
So we know it's not anybody's fault that they become addicted to sugar.
Right.
So first of all, let's just remove the guilt associated
Yep.
with that.
No shame.
But
no
if
shame.
somebody's really heavily addicted to sugar,
Yes.
it is best for them to quit cold turkey
Oh.
and to break that
Okay.
emotional relationship with sugar.
Okay.
Because replacing it is you're still going to crave it because
Okay.
you have that sweet.
Yep.
And
the
your
crutch.
body is trained like that to
Yep.
crave that sweet, and so you're still replacing sweet with sweet, and so that addiction side can still
Yep.
continue.
Yep.
And I would say, like you said, you were kind of addicted, but
Yep.
you also were in a place where you could quit. I mean,
Yes,
I know
yes.
people who legitimately like that
Cannot quit. Yeah.
and so that's where like one of those 21 day
Detox.
Yep.
Yep.
Reset
Yep.
is so beneficial because that's one of like Mark Hyman's things is it takes 21 days. Well, that's not his thing, but that's part of his like blood sugar solutions diet.
Yes.
Which when somebody is really struggling with sugar addiction, that's the diet I like to walk them through is that blood sugar solutions diet because you eliminate all sugar but it's only for 21 days, which
Okay.
anybody can do that.
Yes.
If you tell them they can never have sugar again in their life, they're going to revolt and
Right.
stab you in the throat.
Yes, and eat their whole thing of Oreos at home. Right. Yes.
Over your dead body.
Been there. Yes. Yes.
But if you tell them, okay, it's just 21 days,
Yeah.
that's actually, I mean, for most people, 21 days has been shown to be the amount of time that you need to break a habit.
Okay.
So if you can get them out of the habit of needing sugar,
Yep.
then so actually for people who really have an emotional, it might be best just to get it all out of your house.
Okay.
And
Yes.
then get like a cleanse kit, because
Okay.
a lot of cleanse kits are, if you get a high quality one, obviously, a 7-day cleanse is a really good way because
Okay.
oftentimes those kits come with everything you need to live for those 7 days.
Okay.
And none of it includes sugar, I promise. So,
Yes. Yes.
But then for the people who aren't addicted,
Mm-hmm.
who simply understand, okay, I want to eliminate
Yeah.
the need for sugar in my life, I bake with it or whatever. Like I just want to replace it in the
Yes.
occasional treats I have it.
Yes.
I like honey. Honey doesn't have the same effects on insulin
Okay.
as regular white table sugar does.
Okay.
Although honey has fructose in it,
Okay.
so for
Which could
people
trigger.
who are fructose sensitive,
Yes.
that's still a problem for gout. I mean, that can still and for people that are fructose sensitive, it's an issue.
Okay.
But then some of the alternatives like monk fruit is one.
Okay.
I don't like the taste of monk fruit. I think it's gross, but
Okay. But if you can hack
but
it,
it's a good one if you can hack it.
Yep.
It's a good one. Monk fruit is a good one.
like
Some of those sugar
stevia alcohol, like the sugar alcohol.
sugar
smells?
alcohols like erythritol.
Okay.
are
How's
okay.
how's that stevia? What's your thought on
Stevia's
stevia?
okay. I don't know. I have mixed
Still limit.
thoughts. I have mixed thoughts on it. Xylitol, if you could get birch xylitol as opposed to corn xylitol.
Oh,
Birch
yes,
xylitol
right.
is a good one to replace it, and it's healthier for your teeth.
Okay.
So those are some options. Maple syrup is okay.
Okay.
It's got
Limit.
It's got some
Still
like
limit.
minerals in it that are good for you. I mean, that's the benefit of things like honey and maple syrup is that they have other nutrients in them, whereas
Yes.
white sugar is no nutrients.
And just glycemic.
Yeah.
Yep.
But yeah, it's for the person who really needs to break their relationship with sugar. It's
Yep.
best to go cold
All the
turkey,
way.
and then you get to
Yes.
a place where you're not dependent on it.
Yeah.
The other thing I really find is oftentimes when people crave sugar a lot, it's because they're magnesium deficient, and if they,
Oh.
especially if they're craving chocolate, if they supplement their magnesium levels, they tend to eliminate those cravings.
That is fascinating.
Mhm.
I think I am low magnesium. I need to check that one out.
Yeah.
Okay, interesting. Because I do really well, but if I go to a place where they're all having dinner or desserts like crazy, I'm like, well, I'll just do something with honey.
Mhm.
And then you're right though. Then the next week, I'm like, I got a little taste of sweet. Now I want a little taste of sweet again.
Yeah.
And then it takes me a bit to taper off again.
Yeah, and that's what we were talking about kind of before this episode, where I was saying, we've gotten chocolate and stuff over the holidays, and then I realized when I get in the habit of having something like that, I have it after a meal, and then now it's like my body is already in this place where I eat a meal and then I'm looking for that sweet something.
Yep.
Because it's
Where's
already
my
gotten
chocolate?
In like the course of a week of just having
Yes.
like one occasionally. Now every meal I finish, my body's like, oh, okay, where's my sweet thing? Where's my sweet thing? Like that.
Yep. Then the psychology of it and the treat.
The reward centers in your brain are being triggered, and your body naturally seeks that reward.
Yep.
Which is a vestige of, a time when sugar was a rarity, and to find it, your body craved it and needed it.
Yes.
And like fruit was this really rare thing, and that was the only form of sugar we got in our diets. And when you found fruit, you wanted to eat it because it was a quick source of energy, and that was hard to find. And
It's delicious.
Yeah. And so that was a natural adaptation, but now here we are not needing that because sugar is available all the time, but our bodies still are attuned to craving it.
Yeah. I notice now, being pretty good about not having it, if I have something with sugar in it, I'll get like a creaky joint. I don't know if that's inflammation or something. I don't know, but then my hip joint hurts, and then also I'll get a slight headache on my right side, and I'm like, oh, I did eat that, like. So it's just interesting now being attuned to my body to be like, oh, girl, it matters.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing about when you cut those things out of your diet and you're not having sugar on a regular basis, and you're not having refined flours and grains and all this stuff that's crappy, and sunflower oil and vegetable oils and like all this inflammatory stuff. When you stop eating inflammatory foods, you realize how much better you feel.
Yes.
And then when you have an inflammatory food again, you realize how terrible you feel. But for people that just live their lives in this chronic inflamed state, they have no idea how those foods are actually making them feel, because they just feel that way all the time.
And they just think this is
how
life.
I feel. And you become used to it. And so you get used to living with all this brain fog and memory problems, and you just attribute it to getting older, and you have joint pain, and you think this is life. But in reality, if you weren't eating the inflammatory foods, it's totally not life. It doesn't have to be that way.
It doesn't have to be.
And
you can be the 90-year-old lady who's healthy and still hiking mountains. Yeah. That's what we're going to do. Yeah. We're still going to hike mountains.
Yeah. Although you just told me that that's where you're going to go to die.
I'm like, in our last hey, want to go up to the mountain?
I'm going to watch you crawl away like a sick cat.
And I'm bringing sugar. The end of me, I'm going to eat sugar and just die on the mountain. That's where
I'm going to go crawl behind a tree and die, and I'm going to have to pretend I have nothing to do with it.
Do. I don't know her.
I found this
and just let me go. Unless that bus gets us on the way. Well, thank you, Eleni, for all your knowledge on this. My life has been better because you were mean and took away my sugar in my life. So I thank you for that.
In reality, I was being nice. I was making you feel better.
You're right. Yeah,
I was saving you from yourself.
That's right. I needed that. So we hope everyone can benefit from, just cut it out. Let's see how you feel. Give it a try. Cut it out.
21 days.
Yep.
30. A whole 30.
A whole 30.
I mean, honestly, if you don't feel better, something else is wrong.
Is really wrong. And that is true. At first, you may feel bad because the transition time, your body's not used to it. Now maybe some other things are happening. I don't know. But keep at it.
Yeah. And the sugar addiction is real. Just like any drug, if you stop, you're going to have withdrawals, and so you will probably have headaches and fatigue and all of that stuff that you have to work through as your body detoxes. But that's why I like people to start with a detox.
Yes.
Because it really empties your system of all of that stuff, and I think it speeds up that transition so you feel crappier.
Yes.
But for a shorter period of time.
Get it out. Yep. I love it. Yeah. Burn it down.
Yeah, so hopefully you're all still listening, and that was, I think, to me, it's all so interesting that, I could spend all day in that stuff. I know not everybody is the same, but I spared you from an additional, 25 pages of notes.
Nerd notes.
That's the next 2 episodes, is now I've broken it down into basically 3 episodes.
Yep.
And the final episode, we'll talk more about how to go about systematically removing sugar.
Practical, daily habit. I love it. Well, thank you. Follow along with our 2 more mini-series on this, 2 more episodes. And go live your best renegade life.
Yeah. All right. Love you, Renegades.
Love you. Peace. Thank you for listening to the Renegade Nutrition Podcast. Follow us on all social media platforms and on our website, therenegadenutritionist.com.
Please keep in mind that all of the information given in this podcast is not intended or implied to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment.
Go be renegades.